Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag. This is always a fun one. I always have a good time with this. So here we go. The first question is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And I actually originally had two for this one, but then I read the second question and realized that my second one applied to the second question. So this is technically tied with question two's answer. But for question one, the answer is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I absolutely loved this book. I saw this suggested as a cozy fantasy, and I definitely agree with that. It definitely has cozy vibes. It's about a young woman in England, but it's like an alternate England where there's fairies and sorcerers and everybody just like knows about them. Our main protagonist, Nora, I want to say is her name. She has half of her soul stolen from her when she's a child, so she grows up a little bit differently. She sort of processes feelings in a really muted way and has like sort of strange responses to things that people consider, normal. And it is about her and her meeting with a sorcerer. And so you've got some romance in there, some interesting, cozy fantasy world building, and I really loved this. I especially loved the main character. I thought she was fantastic. I loved a lot of her quirks. I loved her struggles. Overall, this was just a fantastic one. And I'm super excited to check out more works by this author. The next question is, what is the best sequel you've read this year? And for this, I'm going to choose Harrow the Ninth. Like I said, this is tied with Half a Soul for one of my favorites for this year, even though they are so very different, because Harrow the Ninth is about lesbian necromancers in space, and there's a lot of corpses and skeletons and dead things and dying things in these books, but I absolutely loved it anyway. The writing style is really interesting, especially in Harrow, which is told in second person, which is just so fun. It's also extremely confusing, so you spend a lot of the book not really knowing what's going on, which I also enjoyed. It makes the whole thing kind of a mystery by keeping the reader in the dark. But I really enjoyed it. I liked following Harrow more closely, and there were just so many things that I loved about this book. Like I said, it's a follow-up to Gideon the Ninth, and I don't want to get into too much about what goes on in it because I don't want to have any spoilers for Gideon, but this is a great sequel. I really enjoyed it. Question 3 is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to, and I have so many answers for this. There are so many books that I was excited about releasing this year, but I'm so behind on my TBR, my physical TBR, and also I wasn't reading that much because of school. So there are a ton of books that I'm excited to read that have released recently, like The Heavenly Sword by Alice Poon, Master of Souls by Raina Barron, Adore in the Dark by Scott Reichen, Lucha of the Night Forest by Taylor K. Mejia. All of these really excited for, and there's probably more that I'm missing from this list, but those are the top ones that come to mind. 4 is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and for this one I choose The Chalice of the Gods by Rick Riordan, even though I am a little bit nervous for this one as well, because I really liked where they left off with the original 5 Percy Jackson books. So this is the 6th, if you haven't heard of it yet, this is the 6th Percy Jackson specific book, but it takes place later, if that makes sense. I think it takes place after the Heroes of Olympus, but before the Trials of Apollo. I think that's right. And I'm excited to check that out. Excited to see Percy in college and see where that goes. Yeah. So that's probably my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Unless Electo is coming out this year, but I don't think it is. But if Electo the Ninth by Tamsin Muir was coming out this year, then that would definitely be my most anticipated release. But since we haven't gotten an official release date from it yet, I'm going to assume that it's probably coming out sometime next year. 5 is my biggest disappointment of the year, and I think I'm going to have to choose Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn for this one, just because it wasn't bad. I just felt very meh about it. I felt like it was a little bit too long. There were a lot of different plot threads that were pulling away from what felt like the main storyline. There was like a lot going on, and there were some character moments that I didn't really love. I also guess I'm gonna put Chain of Thorns on this, even though it pains me to do so. I really enjoyed Chain of Thorns, but I don't feel that it is quite on the level of the first two books in this series. So even though I liked both of these books, I feel like they didn't hold up to the previous books in their respective series, if that makes sense. Number 6 is The Biggest Surprise, and for this I'm going to choose Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Sugimura, translated by Philip Gabriel. This one surprised me because when I started reading it, I wasn't sure if I was going to finish it. I also went into it thinking it was going to be very different than it was. I was thinking that this was going to be mostly like a fantasy with like a little bit of urban elements sprinkled in. But really, it's like the other way around, where it's mostly like a contemporary, but it has a fantasy element that carries the story along. But it deals with a lot of more contemporary type of issues. I don't really read YA contemporaries or adult contemporaries or any contemporaries because they're just not usually what I like to read, but this was fantastic. I absolutely loved it, and I loved it more and more the more of it I read. So even though I thought it was going to be a fantasy and had really different ideas about what it was going to be, I absolutely ended up loving it. Especially that ending was fantastic. For my favorite new author, I would have to pick Olivia Atwater. I would otherwise choose Tamsin Muir. Actually, you know what? I can do what I want. I'm choosing both of them. So Tamsin Muir and Olivia Atwater, the writers of the Locked Tomb series, of which Harrow the Ninth is a part, and also the writer of Half a Soul. Those were my two favorite books of the year so far, like from a new-ish authors. So those are the ones that I pick. 8 is your newest fictional crush. I don't really get crushes on book characters, so this question doesn't really apply. Newest favorite character, though, I'm going to have to choose Harrowhark Nunnajisamus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But if I'm not going to be that embarrassed because it's hard to pronounce. I absolutely love Harrow. I think she's fantastic. What do I love about her? I love how she is gloomy. She's a gloomy nerd of necromancy. Her backstory, fabulous. I just love so many things about Harrow. Book that made you cry. And this is a trick question because actually it's every book that I read. I am such an easy crier. I cry at everything. So chances are if I finished a book, then there was a point in which it made me at least tear up, if not actually cry. But so for this one, I'm going to choose the book that made me cry the most. And so far that has been Lonely Castle in the Mirror. That ending really got to me. 11 is a book that made you happy, and for this I'm going to choose Vampire Blood Drive by Mira Ong Chua. This is one of my favorite books for the year as well. It's right up there with Harrow and Half a Soul. This is a graphic novel, and it is about a young lady who goes to a blood drive only to find out that actually the blood is being donated to a vampire. It's a vampire blood drive. And so that's what it's about. It's really cute, fluffy, light, sapphic, lots of wonderful things. It's like a series of short stories about them. So each like situation is a little bit different, but it's really fun and fluffy and romantic, and I loved it. 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought this year. And my answer for this one is going to be Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is the edition that I got. I think it's just some kind of like Barnes & Noble edition, or maybe it's more standard, but it has sprayed edges. And I don't have that many books with sprayed edges, so this was really exciting for me. It's also just beautiful, the green and the gold. It's probably showing up as black, but it's green. And it's beautiful. It has this bow and arrow on the back. And I just bought it a couple of days ago, and I adore it. I'm really excited about it. There are a lot of beautiful books that I've bought this year because I'm not good at reducing my physical TBR. I also really enjoy Lore Olympus. It has a really distinct art style, and I just bought a new volume of that as well as The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Marco Shiro. That book is also beautiful, has a beautiful cover. But my top one definitely is going to have to be The Song of Achilles. 13 is what books do you have to read by the end of the year? And wow, I have so many. Everything from the like anticipated releases that you haven't read yet is in here, as well as I had a plan to get my physical TBR down to 10 books by the end of the year. And so that would require me to read about 30 books. And I don't think it's going to happen. But we'll see. We'll see how fast I read. Not that fast is probably the answer. So I'm not going to list 30 books right now, but just know that it's a lot. And that's why this tag is more apt than ever. I am definitely not on track to meet my goal. But that's okay, because that seems to be the eternal mood of the book community as a whole. But hopefully you have less freaking out to do than I do. Hopefully your year so far is going good. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. And I hope you have a great night, universe.